It started on a Tuesday morning with my coffee going cold on the workbench. I was in the garage behind my little place, sorting a box of rusted screws and listening to the radio fade in and out. The heater clicked every few minutes like it was thinking about quitting. I had grease on my hands, the kind that never fully comes off, and I was halfway under the hood of my old pickup when my phone rang. It was my daughter. "Dad," she said, and there was a carefulness in her voice that didn't belong there, like she was reading something she'd practiced in her head. "Evan wants to have you over for dinner on Friday." I slid out from under the truck and sat back on my heels. The concrete was cold through my jeans. "Dinner?" I asked. "Just you two?" "No, his parents too." That part landed quiet. My daughter Claire doesn't call me for nothing, not since she got married. We talk, we check in. But an invitation like that was different, especially with his parents included. They weren't the type to make space for me. Last Christmas, his mother had asked if I could help out in the kitchen while everyone else sat down. Nobody said it out loud, but it was clear where they thought I belonged. Still, I said, "Sure, what time?" "7, Claire said. Then she added, softer, "Please come." I told her I would. Because when your kid asks you to show up, you show up. Even when your stomach tells you something is off. After I hung up, I looked around my garage like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. The worn tool chest, the jars of nails, the tiny house out front with paint that needed touching up. If you didn't know me, you'd think I was scraping by, and I let people think that. I've been doing construction most of my life. I still take small contractor jobs when I feel like it. I like working with my hands. I like keeping my life simple. It keeps the noise out. What I didn't like was the thing I'd been hearing in town. Construction circles aren't big. People talk. They talk at suppliers. They talk at permit offices. They talk when they think you're just another older guy with a beat-up truck. Over the past couple months, I kept catching the same thread. My son-in-law, Evan Reyes, was pushing a big waterfront redevelopment on the east side of Cleveland, a splashy project. Lots of glass, lots of buzzwords. It sounded impressive in headlines. It also sounded expensive. And there was always one snag mentioned under people's breath. One property, one stubborn owner that wouldn't sell. The access lane, the entry point, the piece that made the entire plan workable. That property was mine. My place sits right where they want that clean, sweeping entrance road. They'd offered money through third parties, they'd sent letters, they'd sent someone to knock once while I was out. I'd said no every time, the same way, with no argument. It wasn't for sale. That was it. Evan didn't know it was me. He talked about that old guy on Maple like I was an obstacle, not a person. I'd heard it through a friend who'd sat in on a meeting as a subcontractor. The story got back to me the way these things do, in pieces, like gravel in your shoe. That part didn't surprise me. What surprised me was the dinner invitation all of a sudden, right when the pressure around that project was getting tighter. Friday came with an early winter darkness that made the streetlights look tired. I washed up, put on a button-down shirt that still fit, and drove my old pickup across town. The heater barely worked. The cab smelled like motor oil and peppermint gum. I didn't mind. Evan and Claire lived in a big new place in Westlake. Stone facade, clean landscaping, warm lights glowing through tall windows. The kind of house that looks like it was built to be photographed. When I pulled in, I sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. The engine ticked as it cooled. I watched my own breath fog the glass. Then I got out and walked up. Evan opened the door before I knocked. He was in a suit, not a blazer, a full suit like he was expecting a client. His smile was quick and thin. "Tom," he said, "come in." He calls me Tom because that's what my legal name is, Thomas Carter. But most people who know me call me Carter. Evan never has. Inside, everything smelled like citrus cleaner and expensive candles. The dining table was set like a showroom. At the far end, his parents were already seated, stiff-backed, hands folded, faces calm in that way that says they're not here for a friendly meal. Claire stood near the kitchen doorway. She didn't meet my eyes right away. When she finally did, her expression had that tightness around it, like she'd been holding something in all day and didn't know where to put it. "Hi, Dad," she said, and kissed my cheek. Evan's father, Victor nodded once. His mother, Marianne, gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thomas, Victor said, have a seat. He pointed to the chair farthest from everyone else, near the end of the table where the light didn't reach as well. I sat down without comment. I've sat in worse places. Dinner started with small talk that didn't have any warmth in it. Evan talked about market conditions and delays. Victor made comments about how people need to plan for later years. Marianne asked me if I was still doing little jobs here and there. I answered politely, short, neutral. I watched hands. I watched eyes. I listened for what wasn't being said. Claire barely ate. She kept smoothing her napkin, then folding it again, then touching the edge of her glass like she needed something steady. Halfway through the meal, I noticed a thick folder tucked beside Evan's chair, just visible when he shifted. Manila. Clean edges. The kind you bring to a closing, not a family dinner. I didn't say anything. I cut my food. I chewed slowly. I let the silence do its work. And when Evan finally reached down and pulled that folder into his lap, I set my fork down, rested my hands on the table, and waited for him to decide how he wanted to start. Then I waited. Evan didn't open the folder right away. He held it on his lap for a beat, like he was getting his timing right. The room was quiet except for the soft clink of silverware and the faint hum of whatever heating system they had running under the floors. Claire's eyes flicked to the folder, then to me, then down again. Victor cleared his throat, the way a man does when he's about to announce something he thinks is reasonable. Marianne folded her hands and leaned back in her chair, already settled into her role. Evan placed the folder on the table and slid it toward me, slow and deliberate, like he was offering a contract. Tom, he said, using that same clipped tone he used when he talked to vendors on speakerphone, we need to talk about your situation. I looked at the folder without touching it. My situation, I repeated. Yes, Marianne said, soft and practiced. Your future, dear. I lifted the folder and opened it. The first page was a glossy brochure, big photos, bright hallways, smiling older people in sweaters, sitting around puzzles and playing cards. The title read, Cedar Ridge Senior Living. Under that were forms. Not just one or two, a stack of them. Power of attorney, medical proxy, property transfer, guardianship petition, partially filled out, names typed neatly into blank spaces. I turned a page slowly, not rushing, letting my eyes move like I was reading a grocery list. Evan watched my face for a reaction. He didn't get one. We've been concerned, he continued. You're alone most of the time. You're still working jobs you don't need to be working. You're driving that old truck. It's not safe. Victor leaned forward, elbows near his plate. At your age, you need support, structure, people checking on you. I kept my voice even. So you brought me paperwork. It's not just paperwork, Marianne said. It's a plan, a responsible plan. I flipped the brochure over and looked at the photos again. Clean rooms, a courtyard, a nurse helping someone into a chair. Everything about it was designed to look gentle, but the forms underneath weren't gentle. They were tools. Claire finally spoke, quiet. Dad, it's a nice place. I looked at her then, really looked. She had that strained calm people wear when they're trying to convince themselves they're doing the right thing. Her fingers were tight around her napkin, twisting it in small movements. I didn't argue with her, not yet. Evan tapped the top page with his finger. We're asking you to sign the power of attorney. It lets me handle the sale of your house, handle the move, get you settled. It keeps everything clean. The sale, I said. Evan nodded once. The house is a burden, the upkeep, taxes, repairs. It's too much for you, and honestly, it's tying up resources that could be used better. Victor's mouth tightened like he'd been waiting to say this part. We've been helping where we can, he said, careful, but it's time you stop being stubborn. That was interesting. I'd been paying my taxes on time for decades. I did my own repairs. I kept my place modest because I liked it that way. Nobody had been helping me, but I didn't correct him. I just let the words sit there and show themselves. I turned another page. There was a property transfer document with my address typed at the top. Maple Street. The same Maple Street Evan complained about in meetings, not knowing it belonged to the man sitting across from him. I kept my face still. I could feel the room watching me, waiting for me to get defensive or angry or embarrassed. People like this count on your emotion. They count on you making it easy. I set the papers down neatly. "What happens if I don't sign?" I asked. The question didn't come out sharp, just calm, like I was asking about the weather. The room shifted. Marianne's expression tightened for half a second before she smoothed it over again. Victor's eyes went colder. Evan leaned back in his chair. "Then we have to consider other options." "Like what?" I said. Victor answered too quickly. "Legal options." Evan took over like he was reading from a script. "We'd petition the court, guardianship. We'd have you evaluated. At your age, living alone, it's not unreasonable. We'd present it as concern for your well-being." There it was. Not advice, not support. A threat wrapped in polite language. Marianne added, "It's not personal, Thomas. It's just the responsible way. We can't ignore the risks. You could fall, forget to pay bills, get confused. People take advantage." I nodded once, slow. "So you want control?" Evan's jaw tightened. "We want a solution." Claire's voice shook. "Dad, please. We're just trying to make sure you're okay." I didn't respond immediately. I let a few seconds pass. Silence can do a lot of work if you let it. I looked down at the guardianship document again. The word incompetent was tucked into the language in a way that made my stomach turn, even though I'd seen worse in construction disputes. It's one thing to argue about contracts. It's another to watch your own family lay out a path to erase you. Evan slid a pen toward me. Not a normal pen. Heavy. Gold. It looked like something you'd sign a merger with. "This doesn't have to be difficult," he said. "Sign tonight, and by next week we can have you settled. Cedar Ridge has a transition team. They'll handle the details. You'll have meals, activities, nurses. It's comfortable. Everyone wins. Everyone wins." That was the line they always use when the person losing doesn't matter to them. I picked up the pen, not to sign, just to feel its weight. Evan watched my hand like he thought this was the moment I'd fold. Instead, I set the pen down carefully. "I want to understand something," I said. "Why now?" Evan blinked. "What do you mean?" I said, keeping my tone flat. "Why is this suddenly urgent?" Victor's fingers drummed once on the table. Marianne's eyes flicked to Evan. Evan's voice stayed smooth, but his face flushed slightly above his collar. "Because we're planning ahead. Because we care. Because the longer you wait, the harder it gets." I nodded again, like I accepted that explanation. But I didn't. I'd been hearing enough to know there was pressure somewhere else. Money pressure. Deadline pressure. A project that needed a door opened, and my house was in the way. I didn't say that out loud. I just looked at the documents one more time, slow and steady, and then closed the folder. The room waited for me to speak. Claire's breathing was shallow. Evan's hands were clasped tight in front of him, knuckles pale. I rested both palms on the closed folder. "All right," I said quietly. "If we're going to do this properly, I need to make one call first." Evan frowned. "A call?" "Yes," I said. "Just one." And then I took my phone out, set it on the table, and unlocked it while 4 people watched me like the air had changed and they didn't know why. My phone is old. The screen has a hairline crack that runs from the top corner to the middle, and the case is scuffed from years of sitting in tool belts and glove compartments. Evan's mother glanced at it the way people do when they think an object tells them who you are. I didn't rush. I scrolled to a contact I knew by memory anyway and tapped the name. Evan let out a small laugh like he was trying to keep the room in his control. "Who are you calling, Tom? Your mechanic?" I didn't answer him. I turned the volume up and placed the phone face up on the table. It rang once, twice. Then the call connected. "Good evening," a calm voice said, clear, professional. "This is Daniel Harper." Evan's smile stayed in place, but I saw it wobble. Victor straightened slightly. Marianne's lips pressed together like she was annoyed at the interruption. "Daniel," I said. "It's Thomas Carter." A pause. Just a beat. "Yes, Mr. Carter," Daniel said. "I'm here." That Mr. Carter did something to the room. Not dramatic, just enough to shift the balance. People with real authority don't play along with the tone someone tries to set. They speak plainly. They address you correctly. Evan's eyes narrowed. "Who is this?" I kept my gaze on the folder. "Daniel, I need you to open the shareholder file and pull the contingency provisions." "I can," Daniel said. "Which section?" "Section 16, I said. "Emergency governance." The word governance landed heavy in a dining room that had been pretending this was about care and concern. Evan leaned forward. "Tom, what is this?" I held up one finger, not as a warning, just as a quiet request for patience. Daniel's keyboard clicked faintly through the speaker, like distant rain. "I have it," he said. "Good," I said. "I want an immediate temporary hold placed on all new commitments tied to the harborfront redevelopment, and I want notice drafted for an emergency board meeting, earliest possible slot." Silence spread across the table. Marianne looked confused first, then irritated, then unsure. Victor's face went tight, like he was trying to remember something he didn't want to remember. Evan's mouth opened, then closed again. Daniel didn't hesitate. "Understood. I'll draft the notice and coordinate with council. Do you want full board presence?" "Yes," I said. "Full attendance, and include executive review on the agenda." Evan pushed his chair back slightly, just a few inches, the legs scraping soft against the floor. "What board?" he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. He cleared his throat and tried again. "What are you talking about?" Daniel's voice stayed steady. "Mr. Carter, would you like the meeting set for Monday morning at 9? "Monday at 9, I said. "That works." "Very good," Daniel replied. "I'll send confirmations tonight." I didn't look at Evan when I spoke next. I kept my attention where it belonged, on the process. "One more thing, Daniel," I said. "I want preparation started for leadership change documents, standard packet." Another pause, short. "Yes, Mr. Carter," Daniel said. "I'll have them ready for review." I ended the call and set the phone down again. No flourish, no speech, just a quiet click. For a moment, nobody moved. Even the heat under the floors seemed to go still. Evan stared at my phone like it had betrayed him. His skin had gone paler around the edges of his mouth. Victor's fingers trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. He took a sip and swallowed too hard. Marianne tried to regain control with a soft laugh that didn't land. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Thomas, what are you doing?" I folded my hands over the closed folder. Evan found his voice again, but it was thinner now. "How do you know about Section 16? I looked at him the same way I'd look at a foreman who was trying to bluff his way through a schedule meeting. "Because I've read it," I said. "That's a shareholder agreement," Evan said, almost to himself. "That's internal." Victor's eyes stayed locked on me. He wasn't confused anymore. He was worried. It took him a second to say it, like the words hurt. "Who are you?" Victor asked quietly. Claire had been still the whole time. Now she finally moved, slowly, like she was afraid any sudden motion would break something. Her eyes were wide and her voice was barely a whisper. "Dad, what is happening?" I turned toward her, not rushing the moment. "Claire," I said gently, "I'm okay." "That's not what I mean," she said, and her throat tightened. "What is this?" Evan stood up fast. His chair slid back with a sharp sound. "No," he said. "No, this is some kind of game." He looked at his parents. "Did you set this up? Is this a threat?" Marianne shook her head quickly, but her eyes were darting now. Victor didn't move. He looked like he'd been hit with a memory he'd spent years burying. Evan turned back to me. "You don't have any authority here. You can't just call people and talk about freezing projects and boards and leadership changes. That's my company." I didn't correct him right away. I let him say it. Let him put the claim on the table where everyone could see it. Then I asked him one question, calm and plain. "Evan," I said, "do you know who the majority shareholder is?" He stared at me, and for the first time I saw real uncertainty in his eyes. Not anger, not arrogance, just a gap where certainty used to be. The majority shareholder, he repeated slowly, like he was trying to hear his own words. Victor's face had gone a shade darker, almost gray. His shoulders were slumped now. He looked older than he had when I walked in. Marianne swallowed. "Victor," she said under her breath. "What is he talking about?" Victor didn't answer her. He couldn't. His eyes were still fixed on me. Evan shook his head once, hard. "That's handled through trusts," he said. It's complicated." "It's not that complicated," I replied. I reached into my jacket, not for drama, just because I'd come prepared. My jacket wasn't expensive. It was a plain, dark coat I wore to church and court hearings, and anything that required me to look like I respected the room. From the inside pocket, I pulled out a single envelope, thick paper, clean, sealed. I placed it on the table beside the manila folder. Evan looked at it like it might bite him. "What's that?" he asked. "Proof," I said. I slid it toward him with 2 fingers and stopped, leaving it within his reach but not forcing it into his hands. Daniel had already emailed it earlier in the week when I asked him to update my records. It was a shareholder certification statement, current as of that month. Names, percentages, legal language that doesn't care how expensive your suit is. Evan didn't pick it up. His hands hovered above it, unsure. Claire leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on the envelope. Victor's voice came out rough. "Don't," he said to Evan. It wasn't a command, it was a warning. Evan finally grabbed the envelope and tore it open too fast, ripping the edge. He pulled out the letter, scanned the top line, and his face changed in a way I won't forget. It wasn't one expression. It was several, layered. First confusion, then disbelief, then a sudden, creeping panic. His eyes moved down the page, tracking numbers and names. He looked up at me, mouth slightly open. "No," he said quietly. That's not possible." Claire reached across the table and took the letter from his hand. Evan didn't stop her. He couldn't. She read it, her eyes moving steadily until she hit the line that mattered, the one that made her inhale sharply. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "Thomas Carter," she whispered. "You..." I nodded once. "Yes." Evan's voice came out thin. You're him." I didn't correct his wording. I didn't need to. Victor finally spoke, and it sounded like it cost him something. 24 years ago," he said slowly, staring at the table, "my brother's company was failing. We had debts. We had payroll we couldn't make. We had lenders backing out." He stopped and swallowed. "There was an investor," he continued, "a silent partner, a man nobody ever met. He bought controlling shares through an entity. It saved the business." Marianne stared at him. "Victor, what are you saying?" Victor didn't look at her. He looked at me. "That was you," he said. I kept my tone level. "It was." Evan's hands were shaking now. He tried to hide it by gripping the back of his chair, but his knuckles went white. "You're telling me," he said, and his voice rose slightly before he pulled it back down, "that you own Anderson Group." I let that sit for a second. Then I corrected one part, calmly. "I'm telling you," I said, "that I own the controlling interest, and I've held it since before you ever walked into that office." The dining room felt smaller after that. The air changed. The clean candle smell didn't cover anything anymore. Claire blinked hard, tears forming. "Dad," she said, "why didn't you tell me?" I looked at her, and I didn't try to explain the whole history. Not here, not in front of them. "I wanted you to build your life without leaning on it," I said. "That was the deal your mother and I made." Evan stared at the brochure still peeking out of the folder, the smiling faces on the cover suddenly looking ridiculous. Then his eyes flicked to my phone again, and I saw the math hit him all at once. The project, the land, the pressure, the old man on Maple Street. His voice dropped to a whisper. "The property," he said, "the access road." I didn't answer immediately. I just looked at him long enough for him to understand that I'd been listening the whole time for months, while he complained about a problem he didn't know had a name. Then I said quietly, "Yes." And the room went completely still. I reached over, closed the brochure so the cheerful cover disappeared, and slid the manila folder back toward Evan. "I'm going to leave that with you," I said, "so you remember exactly what you tried to do." Then I stood up, slow, and straightened my jacket. Evan's mouth moved like he wanted to speak, but nothing came out. Victor looked like he'd aged 5 years in 10 minutes. Marianne sat rigid, eyes wide, trying to find a version of the world where this wasn't happening. Claire stared at me with tears on her cheeks, caught between shock and something else, something closer to realization. I picked up my phone. "I'll be home," I said to my daughter, gentle. "If you want to talk, you know where I'll be." Then I walked to the front door without another word, stepped out into the cold night air, and let it hit my face like a reset. In the driveway, I paused by my truck, keys in my hand. Behind me, inside that bright house, I could hear muffled voices starting to rise. I didn't turn around. I got in, started the engine, and drove back toward Maple Street with the heater rattling and my hands steady on the wheel. When I pulled into my driveway, my porch light came on like it always did. I sat there for a moment with the engine running, watching my breath fog the windshield again. Then my phone buzzed once. A new message. I looked down at the screen and saw Evan's name. Evan's text was short. "Please, we need to talk." I didn't reply. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and went inside. My place was quiet, the kind of quiet you earn by keeping your life small. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink until the water ran clear. Then I made tea. Chamomile, nothing fancy. The kettle clicked off, and I let the steam fog the window above the sink. I knew what was coming next. Once people realize you have leverage, they start offering versions of the truth. None of them are complete. They test what you know. They test what you will tolerate. I sat at my kitchen table with the tea and opened my notebook, plain spiral bound. I still like paper when things matter. I wrote 3 lines. Step 1, protect assets and stop new commitments. Step 2, document the attempted coercion. Step 3, separate Claire from their pressure before they reshape her memory of what happened. It wasn't revenge, it was order. If you have a mess, you clean it in the right sequence. I picked up my phone and called Daniel back, not because I was emotional, but because timing matters. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Carter." "Daniel," I said, "I want the hold extended to any related vendors, not just internal approvals. No new POs, no new change orders, anything tied to Harborfront pauses." "Understood," he said. "I will circulate the notice." "Also," I continued, "I need a written summary of tonight's directives sent to my email within the hour." "Yes, sir." I ended the call and took one sip of tea. Then I called the only other person I trust when things turn legal. My attorney, Mark Ellison. He's been with me a long time. He doesn't waste words. "Tom," he said when he answered, "I saw Daniel's alert. Talk to me." I told him what happened at the dinner in plain terms. The folder, the guardianship threat, the property transfer papers, the pressure on my daughter. I didn't decorate it. I didn't try to make it sound worse than it was. The facts were enough. Mark listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Do you have proof?" "Yes," I said. "Audio." "Good," he replied. "Do not engage them directly. Save every message. If they show up, do not let them inside. If they threaten guardianship again, we respond in writing only." That was my preference anyway. After I got off the phone with Mark, I flipped my phone back over and checked Evan's message again. Another one had come in. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." I read it once, then again. When someone says, "I didn't know," it usually means, "I didn't think I would get caught." Sometimes it also means they never bothered to learn who they were stepping on. Either way, it doesn't change what they did. A third message came in, longer. "My parents pushed this. Claire is upset. We can fix this. Please do not do anything at the board meeting." I set the phone down and stared at the wall clock above my stove. It was ticking steady, like it always had. I wasn't going to negotiate in text messages. I wasn't going to let him turn it into a conversation where he could soften the edges. If he wanted to fix something, he could start by telling the truth in a room where the truth mattered. Around 10:30, headlights swept across my living room wall. A car slowed in front of my house, then another. I stood at the window but didn't move the curtain. I didn't need to. I could tell by the way the beams paused and angled that someone had pulled into the street and was looking for my driveway. A knock came at the door a minute later. Not loud, not gentle either. Controlled. I didn't open it. Through the glass, I saw Evan on my porch. No suit this time. Dark coat, hair slightly out of place. He held a paper bag in one hand like an offering. I stayed still and let him knock again. "Tom," he said, voice raised just enough to carry. "Please, I just want to talk." I kept my hands relaxed at my sides. I wasn't afraid of him. I just didn't want him inside my home. "Say what you need to say from there," I called back. He shifted like he wasn't used to being told no. "I made a mistake." "You made a plan," I replied. He swallowed. I didn't know you were the controlling shareholder." "That's not the part that matters," I said. His eyes flicked down, then back up. "My parents, they thought you were vulnerable. They thought it was the only way to move the project forward. So you brought guardianship papers to dinner," I said. He flinched. "It wasn't supposed to be like that." I paused. Silence is useful when someone is trying to fill it with excuses. Then I said calmly, "Here's what happens next. You stop contacting me directly. You speak to counsel. You do not come here again." He leaned closer to the glass, desperate now. "Please, Claire is crying. She's blaming me." I didn't take the bait. "Claire is my concern," I said. "Not your project." He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked tired in a way money doesn't fix. "I'll leave," he said. "Can you at least talk to Claire? Tell her I'm sorry." "I'll talk to my daughter," I said. "Good night, Evan." He stood there a few seconds longer, then he set the paper bag down by the door like a donation and walked back to his car. When the headlights finally disappeared, I picked up the bag and opened it. Coffee, 2 plain donuts, a small attempt at being human after trying to erase mine. I threw it away. Then I went back to the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I don't use it much, but Mark had asked me to organize everything. I made a folder on my desktop and named it simply Friday Dinner. Inside it, I saved the audio file, Evan's messages, and a scanned copy of the shareholder certification statement Daniel had sent earlier. I added one more document, a timeline, with dates and times as clean as a job log. At 11:12 p.m., Daniel emailed my written summary of directives. I clicked it open and read the first line slowly, making sure every word matched what I'd said. And as I read, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Evan, it was Claire. Claire's message was only 2 words. "Are you awake?" I called her instead of texting back. If there was one thing I didn't want, it was her trying to have this conversation in fragments while someone stood behind her coaching her words. She answered on the first ring, but she didn't speak right away. I could hear her breathing. I could also hear something else, faint, like the sound of a TV in another room. "Claire," I said, calm. "Where are you?" "At home," she whispered. "In the bathroom." That told me enough. "Are you alone?" I asked. "For now," she said. Her voice tightened on the last part. I kept my tone steady. "Do you feel safe?" "Yes," she said quickly, then hesitated. "I don't know. I'm confused." "I understand," I said. "Listen to me. I'm not going to argue with anyone tonight. I'm not going to explain this in front of people who don't deserve the explanation. I just need you to do something small." "What?" she whispered. "Pack a bag," I said. 2 days, essentials. Then come here." Silence, then a shaky inhale. "Dad," she said, "Evan is saying you're going to ruin him. His parents are saying you're unstable. They're saying you tricked everyone." I let that sit for a second, not because it surprised me, but because she needed to hear me, not panic. "Claire," I said, "they brought guardianship papers to dinner." "I know," she said, and her voice broke. "I didn't know it was like that. I swear I didn't. They told me it was a conversation about downsizing, about helping you. I believe you. I said. But you need to be with me for the next part. Monday is coming, and they're going to spin this in every direction they can. Another pause. Okay, she said, quieter. Okay, I'll come. Good, I replied. And Claire, do not tell them you're leaving. Just go. I heard movement, then the soft sound of a lock clicking. I'm going to hang up, she said. I'll be there soon. When she arrived 40 minutes later, I met her on the porch with my jacket on. She looked like she'd been crying for hours. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot. She carried a small overnight bag and her phone in a tight grip like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I didn't ask questions at the door. I just pulled her into a hug and held her for a moment until her shoulders dropped a fraction. Inside, I made her tea and set a blanket over the back of the chair. The house smelled like chamomile and the faint sawdust that never quite leaves my clothes. She sat at the kitchen table and stared at the steam rising from the mug. I feel stupid, she said finally. You're not stupid, I replied. You were cornered. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. Why didn't you tell me, Dad, about the company? I didn't rush the answer. Your mom and I agreed, I said, that you should live your life without thinking you had a safety net made of money. It changes people. It changes choices. We didn't want that for you. She nodded slowly, absorbing it, but I could tell she was still stuck on one thing. So, Evan, he's been working for you, she said, almost like she couldn't get the words out. Yes, I said, but I wasn't watching his day-to-day. I was watching outcomes, through the proper channels. Her brow furrowed. Proper channels. I opened my laptop and turned the screen slightly so she could see. I didn't show her everything, just enough to replace fear with structure. This is Daniel Harper, I said, pointing at the email header from earlier. He's the managing trustee for the holding entity that owns my shares. He reports to me. He coordinates with legal. Claire stared at the email, then looked up. So you're really the majority? Yes, I said. Her eyes filled again, but her voice stayed controlled. Evan kept talking about some shareholder who won't approve certain spending. He would complain about it like it was some faceless problem. I nodded once. That was me. She sat back, stunned, and I could see her mind racing, pieces falling into place, the way Evan always had to leave suddenly for calls, the way his parents talked about money like it was oxygen, the way they treated my small house like it was something to be embarrassed by. I didn't say, I told you so. I didn't need to. Instead, I pushed one folder across the table. Not the dinner folder, another one. Inside were printed copies of 3 things: the brochure cover, the guardianship draft, and the property transfer form. On top was a single sheet titled Timeline with dates and times in plain text. Claire read it slowly. Her hands shook slightly. When she reached the part about the guardianship petition, she set the page down and pressed her palm to her forehead. They were going to call me as a witness, she said quietly. They already did, I replied. In their plan. She looked up, startled. What do you mean? I mean they got you to say out loud that you thought it was for the best, I said. They want that memory planted because it's useful later. Claire stared at the table, breathing through it. I didn't understand, she whispered. They said you were stubborn, that you were getting older, that it would be safer. Evan said it was normal planning. I know, I said. And that's why I'm not angry with you. I'm focused. She nodded, but there was a different expression now. Less confusion, more clarity. Like the fog was lifting and she didn't like what she was seeing. What happens Monday? She asked. I answered her the same way I answer any job question when a crew wants to know the plan. We keep it simple, I said. We stick to facts. We let documents speak. We don't debate. We don't plead. She swallowed. Evan said you're going to fire him. I'm going to hold him accountable, I said. Those are not the same thing. Claire's phone buzzed on the table. She flinched and grabbed it, then looked at the screen. Evan, she said, voice flat. He's calling. Don't answer, I said. She didn't. The phone stopped, then buzzed again. A text. She read it, then turned the screen toward me. "I'll do anything. Tell your dad to stop. I'll sign whatever. Please come home." Claire's mouth tightened. Not anger, something more settled than that. "I can't believe he did this," she said. I didn't respond immediately. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a small recorder, a plain black device I keep for contract meetings. I set it on the table between us. "From this point forward," I said, "we document everything. If anyone says anything that sounds like pressure or threats, we write it down. If they show up, we don't open the door. If they call, we let it go to voicemail." Claire nodded slowly. "Okay." Then I slid a second sheet across the table. It was a simple list. Monday 7:30 a.m., leave for downtown, 8:15 a.m., arrive with counsel, 8:30 a.m., review packet, 9 a.m., board meeting. Claire stared at it. "I'm going with you." "You don't have to," I said. "Yes," she replied. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I do." Saturday passed in a steady, controlled way. We didn't talk nonstop, we didn't spiral, we cooked simple food, we watched the news on low volume. Claire took a long shower and fell asleep on the couch with a blanket pulled up to her chin. Sunday morning, my phone rang once. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a message came through. It was Victor, Evan's father, leaving his voice calm, strained. "Thomas," he said, "we need to meet before Monday, please. This can be handled privately. There's no reason to embarrass anyone." I played it once for Claire. Her face went still, then hard. "It's not about embarrassment," she said, mostly to herself. "It's about control." I nodded. "Exactly." At 4 p.m., Mark Ellison stopped by my house. He came in with his coat still on and a legal pad under his arm. Calm, as always. He sat at my kitchen table and looked at Claire with a professional courtesy that didn't ignore her pain. "Claire," he said, "I'm sorry you were put in the middle." Claire nodded. "I just want it to be clean." "It will be," Mark said. Then he turned to me. "Tom, we have 2 tracks, corporate governance and personal protection. We keep them separate, but we keep them aligned." I asked, "What's the risk?" Mark didn't sugarcoat it. "They may try to file something overnight, some kind of guardianship petition. They may claim you're being manipulated by counsel. They may also try to pressure Claire to return home and say you're confused." Claire's jaw tightened. Mark continued. "So tomorrow, we walk in with documentation. We also have a prepared response letter to any court filing. And we have a plan for Claire's statement, if needed." He slid a folder across the table to me. It was thicker than the one Evan had brought, and everything inside it was clean and numbered. Tabs, dates, printed emails, the audio file transcript, already transcribed. "This is your reality," Mark said. "We let it speak." That evening, Claire received one more message from Evan. This one wasn't pleading. It was different, shorter, sharper. "If you don't come home tonight, I'll tell them your dad is having an episode. I'll do what I have to do." Claire read it twice. Her hands stopped shaking. She handed the phone to Mark without a word. Mark looked at the screen, then nodded once, the way a man nods when a door closes on a certain option. "Good," he said quietly. "Now we have intent." Claire looked at me. "He's really going to try." "I know," I said, and in that moment I saw the shift in her. The part of her that had been trying to believe this could be explained away finally stopped trying. Monday morning would be a controlled setting, a respectable room, rules and minutes and votes. But the real confrontation had already happened at my kitchen table, where my daughter decided she wasn't going to be managed anymore. At 7:10 a.m., I put on my suit, the one I keep for meetings I don't attend on video. Mark stood by the door with his briefcase. Claire wore a simple dark coat and kept her shoulders straight. I checked my phone one last time. No new messages. Then we walked out into the cold morning air and headed toward downtown, where the glass tower waited and the boardroom lights would already be on. We arrived early. That was intentional. The lobby of Anderson Group's headquarters had the kind of quiet you only get in corporate buildings before the day fully starts. Polished stone floors, security desk, a few people moving in the distance with coffee cups and ID badges swinging from lanyards. Claire stayed close to me without clinging. Mark walked half a step behind, briefcase in his left hand, phone in his right. He looked like he belonged there because he did. The guard at the desk checked our names, then made a call. After a brief pause, he nodded and handed us visitor badges. The elevator ride up was silent. Not tense, just focused. The numbers lit up in order. My ears popped slightly between floors. I watched Claire's reflection in the mirrored panel. Her face was calm now, tired but calm. On the 34th floor, Daniel Harper was waiting near the conference suite. He was in a dark suit, no wasted movement, hair neatly combed. He greeted me with a small nod. "Mr. Carter," he said. Then he looked at Claire. "Ms. Carter." Claire's eyes widened slightly at the formality, but she nodded back. She didn't speak. She was taking it all in. Daniel handed Mark a folder, then gave one to me. "Packets are on the table," he said. "Board members have received the emergency agenda. Security is on standby per your instruction. HR counsel is present." "Good," I said. We stepped into the boardroom. It wasn't flashy, it was expensive in a quiet way. Long table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the river. The city had that winter gray look, like everything was waiting for spring. A few board members were already seated, murmuring to each other in low voices. When they saw me, conversations stopped the way they do when someone important walks in without needing to announce it. I took the chair at the head of the table. Mark sat to my right. Claire sat slightly back, not at the main line of the table, but close enough to hear everything. Daniel stood off to the side with a tablet and a calm expression. At 8:58, the door opened again. Evan walked in with Victor. Evan tried to look like himself, suit pressed, tie straight, shoulders set. But his eyes gave him away. He'd barely slept. His skin had that dull, strained look. He kept swallowing like his mouth was dry. Victor looked smaller than he had at the dinner. He moved like his joints hurt. He avoided looking at me, then failed at it and looked anyway. They took seats near the far end, not at the very end, but close. Like defendants who still wanted to be seen as participants. At 9:01 sharp, Daniel closed the door. I didn't waste time. "Good morning," I said, voice level. "Thank you for making yourselves available on short notice." I nodded toward Daniel. He tapped the screen at the front of the room, and the first slide came up. It was a photograph, the Cedar Ridge brochure, big and bright, filling the screen like an advertisement no one asked for. Then the next slide, guardianship petition draft. Next slide, property transfer form with my Maple Street address typed at the top. The room went still. A board member named Elaine Porter, a sharp woman in her 60s with a controlled expression, leaned forward slightly. Another, Jim Callahan, shook his head once, slow, like he already knew he was about to be disappointed. I kept my hands folded on the table. "Friday night," I said, "I was invited to a family dinner at Mr. Reyes's home. During that dinner, Mr. Reyes and his parents presented me with paperwork designed to transfer my property, assign him power of attorney, and initiate a guardianship process if I refused." I didn't add adjectives. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Mark slid a small stack of transcripts to the center of the table and passed copies to the nearest board members. "These are transcriptions," I said, "from an audio recording of that dinner. Full file is available. Counsel has verified authenticity." Evan's jaw tightened. Victor stared down at his hands. Daniel played a short clip. Not the worst one, just enough. Evan's voice came through the room, clear. "We'd petition the court, guardianship. We'd have you evaluated." Then Victor's voice, rougher. "Legal options." Then Marianne's, too smooth. "It's the responsible way." Daniel stopped the clip and the room went quiet again, heavier this time. Elaine's eyes moved from the transcript to Evan. "Mr. Reyes," she said, "is this accurate?" Evan's throat worked. It's being taken out of context." I held up one hand, not to silence him, but to keep the process from turning into noise. "Context is important," I said. "So here is the context. The harborfront redevelopment cannot proceed without an access corridor across my property. That project has been presented to investors as foundational to the company's growth strategy. Mr. Reyes has been under pressure to secure that access. He attempted to do so by coercion through family channels. Jim Callahan exhaled through his nose. Jesus. Evan tried again. The project is good for the company. This is personal. This should not be. Elaine cut in calmly. It became business the moment you used your position and resources to coerce a controlling shareholder. Evan's eyes flicked to me, then away. Mark spoke then, briefly. We are not here to debate emotion. We are here to address governance, fiduciary duty, and legal exposure. He slid another document forward. This is a risk assessment. Potential civil liability, potential criminal referral depending on jurisdictional definitions of elder exploitation. Additionally, reputational risk tied to a senior executive's conduct. Victor finally looked up, voice strained. This can be handled privately. Elaine's gaze stayed steady. It already wasn't. I let the board sit with it for a moment. Then I continued. Second, I said, I am placing an immediate pause on all new commitments related to Harborfront until leadership review is complete and the project is reassessed by independent counsel. This was enacted Friday night through the emergency governance provision. Daniel nodded and displayed the notification log. Time stamped. Distributed. Evan's face tightened. You can't just freeze operations. I looked at him calmly. I can. And I did. Then I said the part that mattered, without drama. Third, I said, I am recommending immediate termination of Evan Reyes as CEO, effective today. There was no gasp, just a quiet shift in the room like everyone had been waiting for someone to say it. Elaine looked around the table. Motion, she said. I move for immediate termination of Evan Reyes as CEO and removal from all executive authority, effective immediately. Jim Callahan said. Second. Elaine turned to me. Vote. I nodded. All in favor. Hands rose one after another. Clean. Decisive. Evan didn't move. Victor didn't move. Their votes didn't matter. Elaine's voice stayed calm. Motion carried. Evan's face went blank for a second, like his mind needed a moment to accept it. Then he stood up abruptly, chair scraping. Wait, please. You don't understand. This was my parents. This was... Mark spoke before it could turn into pleading. Mr. Reyes, your access is being revoked. Security will escort you to HR to retrieve personal items. You will receive a written notice of termination and instructions through counsel. Evan's voice rose, then he forced it down, trying to regain dignity. Claire, he said, looking past me. Claire didn't respond. She looked at him, eyes dry now, and there was a kind of calm in her face that didn't invite negotiation. Evan's shoulders sagged slightly at that. Two security officers entered quietly, not aggressive, just present. Evan stared at them, then at Victor, then back at the board. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't have the room anymore. He gathered himself, pulled his jacket straight, and walked out between the officers. Victor stayed seated, staring at the table like it had betrayed him. For a moment after the door closed, nobody spoke. Then Elaine looked at me. Mr. Carter, she said, with respect, we should have known who you were. I answered simply. I preferred it that way. Jim Callahan leaned back. Well, the quiet investor finally shows up. I nodded once. I'm not here to run the day-to-day. I'm here to protect the company and the people who depend on it. Elaine glanced toward Claire, then back to me. Do you want us to address family involvement? Yes, I said. And here is the boundary. Claire is not to be pressured by any corporate representative. Any contact goes through counsel. If anyone tries to use company resources to influence her, it becomes a governance issue. Mark added, We have documentation of direct threats made last night. That will be retained in the record. Elaine nodded once. Understood. The rest of the meeting moved in a controlled way. Interim leadership assignment, project review, communications plan to vendors and investors, a short statement prepared for internal staff. Everything measured, nothing theatrical. At 10:14 a.m., Daniel stepped aside and spoke quietly into his phone. Then he returned and leaned toward me. HR has confirmed, he said. Mr. Reyes's access is fully terminated, accounts locked, company cards canceled, vehicle return request issued. Good, I said. Claire let out a slow breath, like she'd been holding it since Friday night. When the meeting adjourned, board members filed out in small groups. Some nodded at me with a new kind of respect. Others looked uneasy, as if they were realizing how close they'd been to being part of something ugly. Elaine stopped before leaving and spoke softly. "I'm sorry this happened to you." I nodded. "Thank you." After everyone left, the room emptied until it was just me, Mark, Claire, and Daniel. Claire finally spoke, voice quiet. "So it's real." "It's real," I said. Mark checked his watch. Now we address the personal track. Daniel handed Mark a document. "We received a court filing attempt overnight," he said. "Not accepted yet. Guardianship petition submitted through a family attorney. It cites concern and references Claire as a potential witness." Claire's face tightened. Mark flipped through the pages and nodded once. "We respond today, and we attach Friday's evidence." He looked at me. "Tom, we can stop this quickly." I stood up and straightened my cuffs. "Let's do it." We left the building through a side entrance. The wind off the river was sharp and clean. Claire pulled her coat tighter, and for the first time all weekend she looked like she could stand without leaning on anything. Halfway to the parking garage, my phone buzzed. One new voicemail. Unknown number. I played it on speaker as we walked. It was Marianne, Evan's mother. Her voice was tight, controlled, and trying very hard not to sound like panic. "Thomas," she said, "please call me back. We need to talk. He is not well. We're all very worried. This is getting out of hand. Claire belongs with her husband. Please do the right thing." I ended the voicemail and put the phone away. Claire looked at me. "They're still doing it." "Yes," I said, "but now we're not guessing. We're responding." Mark nodded. "And we're responding in writing." We reached the car. I opened the door for Claire, then got in myself. The heater clicked on. The vents smelled faintly of dust, familiar and plain. Mark sat in the back seat with his briefcase and started drafting a response letter on his laptop immediately, fingers moving steady. I stared out at the gray river and thought about the dinner table again, the glossy brochure, the gold pen, the way Evan thought he could sign away my life like it was paperwork. Then I looked at my daughter in the passenger seat. She was quiet, but her posture was different now, straighter, more awake. I turned the key and pulled out of the garage. There was still one thing left to handle, not in a boardroom, at home, in private, with rules. When we got back to my place, the first thing I did was open the curtains. It sounds small, but it mattered. I wanted the house bright. I wanted everything visible, no corners for anyone's story to hide in. Mark sat at my kitchen table and finished the response letter. He kept it clean and direct. It did not argue. It did not plead. It laid out facts, included attachments, and warned against further contact or filings without counsel. He attached the transcript excerpts, the audio verification statement, and a short timeline with dates and times. Claire read it once, then again. She didn't cry this time. She just nodded. At 12:40 p.m., Mark emailed it to the attorney listed on the guardianship paperwork. He also sent a copy to the county clerk's office with a request to flag the matter for review if the filing was resubmitted. He did not threaten anyone. He just documented what already existed. After that, he closed his laptop and finally allowed himself to exhale. "This stops them," he said, "not because they feel bad, because the record is clear." Claire sat with her tea and stared at her phone like it was something foreign. Evan had sent more messages while we were downtown. They were all variations of the same thing. "Please come home. My parents are freaking out. We can fix this. You're tearing our family apart." Then one message that was different. "You knew all along." Claire showed it to me without a word. I read it once and handed the phone back. "I didn't know all along," I said. "I suspected enough. There's a difference." She nodded slowly. "He's trying to make me the problem." "That's what people do when they lose control," I said. Mark left mid-afternoon. Before he walked out, he looked at Claire. "If anyone shows up," he said, "you don't open the door. If anyone calls, you don't explain. You send them to me. That's it." Claire agreed. Simple. Final. After Mark's car disappeared down the street, the house got quiet again. Not lonely quiet. Clean quiet. Claire took a shower and changed into sweats. I did a load of laundry, normal things. A reset you can feel in your shoulders. Around 6 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Just one. I looked through the side window. Victor stood on my porch alone, hands at his sides. No folder this time, no rehearsed posture. He looked tired and older than he should. Claire stepped behind me, not hiding, just present. I opened the door, but I didn't invite him inside. Victor cleared his throat. "Thomas," he said, "I'm not here to fight." I waited. He glanced down at the porch boards as if they might offer him a better script. "We never should have done that," he said. "The paperwork, the threats. It was wrong." I nodded once, not forgiving, just acknowledging the statement existed. Victor's eyes lifted to Claire. "Claire," he said quietly, "I'm sorry." Claire didn't answer right away. She held his gaze and stayed still. Victor continued, voice low. "Evan is blaming everyone. My wife is blaming everyone. I'm not proud of any of it. But I need to tell you something, Thomas." I stayed silent. "The Harborfront project," he said, "was never as secure as Evan made it sound. He promised investors things he hadn't locked down. He pushed ahead to look strong. He was desperate." I didn't react. I'd already suspected it. Victor swallowed. "He thought if he could get your property, everything would stabilize. That's why he did what he did. That's why we allowed it." Claire's hand tightened slightly around the edge of the door frame. Victor looked at her again. "He loves you," he said, then stopped, as if he knew it sounded weak. "But he loves winning more." Claire's expression didn't change. "You should go," she said, calm. Victor nodded like he'd expected that. "I understand." He looked back at me. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say it plainly. I'm sorry." I nodded once. "All right?" Victor stepped off the porch and walked down the path without looking back. When the door closed, Claire released a breath and leaned her forehead against the wood for a moment. Then she stood up straight again. That night, she didn't go back to Evan. She stayed in my guest room. We didn't stay up late talking. We didn't rehearse arguments. We ate simple food, watched a quiet show, and let the day settle. On Tuesday morning, Claire made a call to a family law attorney, not because she wanted a war, but because she wanted clarity, boundaries, paperwork that matched reality. I didn't sit beside her and coach. I sat in the kitchen and cleaned a pan that was already clean, just something to do with my hands while she did what she needed to do. By the end of the week, the guardianship attempt was dead. The attorney on the other side backed off fast once the evidence was attached and the corporate termination became public record. Evan stopped texting after his counsel contacted Mark and was told, in writing, that any further attempts to intimidate Claire would be preserved. The company stabilized quickly. Interim leadership was steady. The Harborfront project got reassessed by people who cared more about math than ego. Vendors got paid. Crews kept working. The people who depended on their paychecks weren't punished for one man's arrogance. My property on Maple Street stayed mine. No transfer, no transition team, no glossy brochure. Claire moved into a short-term rental nearby while she decided her next step. She visited often. Some days we talked. Some days we didn't. She started sleeping better. Her shoulders stayed a little less tense each week. One evening, she stood in my kitchen and said something small. "I thought I had to choose him to keep the peace," she said. "I didn't realize I was paying for that peace with myself." I nodded. "That's how it works." She looked at me. "And you? You let them think you were nothing." "I let them show what they do with that assumption," I said. After that, life got quieter in a good way. I went back to my routines: coffee on the workbench, radio low, light work in the garage, the kind of order that doesn't ask for permission. A few weeks later, Daniel called me with an update on another matter. Nothing urgent, just a report. Before hanging up, he paused. "Mr. Carter," he said, "there's something else you should know. We've had 2 other complaints come in recently. Unrelated departments, different families, similar pattern, pressure on older stakeholders, attempts to move assets quietly. I didn't say much at first. I just stared at the garage wall and listened. When he finished, I said, "Send me the summaries. No names yet, just the pattern." "Yes, sir," he replied. After I hung up, I put the phone face down and stood there in the quiet. Sometimes people don't do these things once. They do them because they've gotten away with smaller versions before. And sometimes you only notice the pattern when it tries to hit your own front door.